Natalia Nolan yanked open the sleek black car's back door and slid inside, exhaling sharply as she tossed her bag onto the seat beside her. "The airport, please, and step on it," she said without glancing at the driver. The man in the front seat turned slightly, his dark brows arching in amusement. "Excuse me." Natalia finally looked up, expecting to see the usual uniformed chauffeur her friend had arranged. Instead, she locked eyes with a man who looked more like a magazine cover model than a driver. He had sharp, aristocratic features, piercing blue eyes, and a jawline so defined it could cut glass. He was dressed in an expensive black suit, too tailored, too perfect for a chauffeur, but she was in too much of a rush to question it. "You are the driver, right?" she asked, waving a hand impatiently. "Can we go?" For a moment the man didn't respond, then something flickered across his expression: amusement, intrigue. "Right," he said smoothly, turning back to the wheel. "The airport it is." The car purred to life, effortlessly gliding onto the road. Natalia exhaled, leaning her head back. "Thank you, I swear this day has been a disaster. My flight got changed last minute, my suitcase broke, and now I'm running late." "Unfortunate," the man said, his voice deep and smooth. She glanced at him again. He was gripping the wheel with practiced ease, his wrist adorned with an expensive-looking watch. Even his cologne was rich and intoxicating. "Have you been driving long?" she asked, making conversation. He let out a low chuckle. "You could say that." Something about the way he said it made her frown. "You don't really seem like a driver." "Why do you say that?" "I don't know," she admitted. "You look like you should be in a boardroom making million-dollar deals, not chauffeuring people around." The man shot her a sideways glance, lips twitching. Interesting observation. Before she could press further, the car rolled to a stop in front of the airport. Natalia scrambled for her purse. "How much do I owe you?" The man turned fully this time, his gaze locking onto hers. "Nothing." She hesitated. "What do you mean, nothing?" "Consider it a favor," he said smoothly, before stepping out and opening the door for her. Natalia hesitated, her instincts telling her something wasn't quite right, but she was already late. "Okay. Thanks, I guess," she muttered, before grabbing her bag and hurrying inside. It wasn't until she was in the terminal that she realized she had no idea what his name was. A week later, Natalia returned to New York, the strange encounter with the mysterious driver lingering in her mind. She had told her friend Lee about it, who had laughed and said, "What if he wasn't actually a driver?" Then who was he? Natalia had scoffed. A billionaire playing chauffeur for fun, but the thought nagged at her. Her question was answered 2 nights later when Lee dragged her to a charity gala, insisting it would be good for networking. Natalia had barely stepped into the glittering ballroom when her breath caught. There, across the room, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, was the man from the car. And he was surrounded by some of the most powerful people in the city. Natalia's stomach flipped. "Lee," she whispered, gripping her friend's arm. "See that guy?" Lee followed her gaze. "Oh my God, that's Preston Jameson." "Who?" Lee gaped at her. "Preston Jameson, billionaire. Owns half the luxury hotels in New York. You seriously don't know who he is?" Natalia felt the blood drain from her face. "I thought he was a chauffeur." Lee stared at her, then burst out laughing. "Oh my God, you didn't." At that moment, Preston's gaze lifted and locked onto hers. His lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. Natalia swallowed hard. She had made a huge mistake. Natalia's pulse pounded as Preston Jameson's gaze locked onto hers from across the ballroom. The realization that the man she had mistaken for a chauffeur was, in fact, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in New York sent a rush of heat to her face. His slow, knowing smile only deepened her unease. Lee nudged her. "Well, this is about to get interesting." Natalia barely had time to react before Preston began making his way toward them. The crowd seemed to part effortlessly for him, as if the universe itself recognized his importance. Every movement he made exuded confidence, power, and an undeniable magnetism that sent a shiver down her spine. "Miss Nolan," he greeted smoothly when he reached her, his deep voice carrying just enough amusement to make her stomach tighten. She forced herself to meet his gaze, determined not to let him see how flustered she was. Mr. Jameson, she replied, keeping her tone even. Funny running into you here. I guess chauffeurs really do get around. Lee sucked in a breath beside her, but Preston only chuckled, a rich, velvety sound that sent an unwanted thrill through Natalia. Indeed, he said, tilting his head slightly. Though I must admit, I don't often drive myself. That was a unique circumstance. Natalia folded her arms, feigning nonchalance. And yet, you didn't correct me when I assumed you were the driver. His gaze darkened, something unreadable flickering across his expression. It was far more entertaining to let you believe it. She narrowed her eyes. So what, you were just toying with me? Not at all, he answered, taking a step closer. I was intrigued. The air between them grew charged, and Natalia could feel Lee shifting awkwardly beside her. She wasn't sure if it was the sheer intensity of Preston's presence or the embarrassment of her mistake, but she was suddenly desperate for an escape. Well, I'm sure you have plenty of important people to talk to, she said, taking a small step back. Enjoy your evening, Mr. Jameson. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Dance with me, she froze. Slowly, she looked back at him. Excuse me, Preston extended a hand, the weight of his gaze making it impossible to look away. One dance. Lee shot her a wide-eyed look, silently screaming at her to say yes. But Natalia hesitated. Everything about this man screamed danger, not in a sinister way, but in a way that told her he could unravel her carefully built walls with ease. Why? She asked, studying him, his lips curved ever so slightly. Because I want to. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She should say no. She should walk away and pretend this entire night never happened. Instead, she placed her hand in his. Preston led her onto the dance floor, his grip firm but not forceful. The music shifted to a slow, elegant melody as he pulled her into position, his hand resting at her waist. You don't seem like the gala type, he murmured as they moved in sync. She arched a brow, and you don't seem like the type to drive strangers to the airport. His lips twitched, amusement dancing in his eyes. Touché. They moved effortlessly, his lead strong and sure. It was infuriating how easy it felt to be in his arms, how naturally their bodies fit together. Tell me, Natalia, he said after a moment, what is it you do? She hesitated, sensing genuine curiosity beneath his charm. I work in event planning, she admitted. Mostly corporate functions, high-end weddings. Nothing as extravagant as this, though. His grip tightened slightly. Impressive, she scoffed. You say that like you're surprised. Not at all, he said smoothly. I just find it fascinating how little I know about you, and yet you've been on my mind since the moment you got into my car. Her breath caught. She searched his face, looking for any trace of insincerity, but found none. You barely know me, she said softly. His fingers brushed against hers. That's what makes this so intriguing. A shiver ran down her spine, but before she could respond, the music ended. Preston didn't release her immediately, his gaze lingering on hers as if debating something. Then, finally, he let her go. Thank you for the dance, he murmured. She nodded, stepping back. Good night, Mr. Jameson. She turned before he could say anything else, weaving her way through the crowd. Her heart was still racing by the time she reached Lee, who was practically vibrating with excitement. I don't know what just happened, Natalia admitted, exhaling sharply. Lee grinned. Oh, I do. You just caught the attention of the most unattainable man in New York. Natalia wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. All she knew was that Preston Jameson was dangerous, not in the traditional sense, but in a way that made her feel things she wasn't sure she was ready for. And judging by the intensity in his eyes, she had a feeling this wasn't the last time their paths would cross. Natalia wasn't sure why her pulse spiked when she spotted Preston Jameson again, but there he was, standing outside the entrance to her office building as if he had all the time in the world. Dressed in another exquisitely tailored suit, he looked completely at ease, hands in his pockets, watching the city move around him. She had spent the last few days convincing herself that their dance had been nothing more than a fleeting moment. Yet here he was, proving her wrong. As she approached, she hesitated, debating whether to pretend she hadn't seen him. But before she could make a decision, his gaze lifted, locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. You're persistent, she said, stopping in front of him. He tilted his head, a flicker of amusement in his expression. I prefer determined. She folded her arms. Why are you here? I wanted to see you. His answer was simple, direct, and completely disarming. She exhaled sharply. You don't give up easily, do you? No, he admitted. Not when something interests me. Her stomach tightened, but she forced herself to stay neutral. And you think showing up outside my office is the best way to prove that? It got your attention, didn't it? She narrowed her eyes. That's debatable. His lips twitched, but he didn't press the point. Instead, he glanced past her toward the building. Lunch, she blinked. What? I assume you take one, and unless you have plans, I'd like to take you somewhere. She hesitated. Every instinct told her that getting involved with a man like Preston was a terrible idea. He was too smooth, too powerful, too everything, but despite herself, she was curious. Fine, she said, but it's just lunch. His gaze held hers for a beat longer than necessary. Of course. Natalia hadn't expected a simple lunch invitation to turn into an experience, but with Preston Jameson, nothing was ordinary. He took her to a rooftop restaurant that wasn't just exclusive, it was the kind of place only people like him even knew existed. The second they arrived, they were led to a private table overlooking the city skyline, the kind of view that left most people breathless. She was determined not to be impressed. This is excessive, she commented, settling into her seat. Preston leaned back in his chair, studying her. Would you rather have gone to a deli? I would have been fine with something less extravagant, he arched a brow. Noted, next time I'll take you somewhere less intimidating, she frowned. Who said there'd be a next time? I did, he said simply. She exhaled, shaking her head. You're impossible. I've been told worse. Despite herself, a reluctant smile tugged at her lips. The conversation shifted as they ordered, and for the first time Natalia found herself genuinely curious about him, not about the billionaire, but the man underneath. So do you always drive your own cars? She asked, leaning forward slightly. Preston's gaze flickered with amusement. Not often, that night was an exception. Why? He hesitated for the first time. I needed space. Some nights I prefer to be alone. Something about the way he said it made her pause. There was weight behind his words, something unspoken. I get that, she said after a moment. Do you? She nodded. Sometimes you just need a break from everything. His expression softened, and for a brief moment she saw something real, something raw beneath the polished exterior, but just as quickly it was gone. You're not what I expected, he admitted. She tilted her head. And what did you expect? He studied her, as if searching for the right words. Someone different, she arched a brow. That's vague. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. I don't do this, she frowned. Do what? Chase people. Her breath caught, but she forced herself to stay composed. Then why are you? His gaze didn't waver. Because you're not like the others. And I don't know why, but I want to find out what that means. A strange warmth spread through her chest, but she quickly smothered it. This is just lunch, she reminded him. For now, he said smoothly. She should have been irritated. Instead, she found herself fighting back a smile. She was in trouble. Natalia had spent her entire life being careful, maintaining control, never allowing herself to be swept away by something or someone who could unravel her. But Preston Jameson was relentless in a way that made resistance feel both impossible and unnecessary. He was not a man who gave up easily, and despite her best efforts, she found herself drawn deeper into the gravity of his world. Their time together became more frequent, their conversations stretching into the early hours of the morning, their meetings shifting from scheduled encounters to stolen moments that neither of them could seem to resist. It was intoxicating, the way he looked at her as if she were the only thing in the world worth his attention. And yet, there was an undercurrent to him, something deeper beneath the polished billionaire exterior. He never spoke of his past unless she pried, and even then, his answers were carefully measured, revealing only what he wanted her to know. One evening, he invited her to his penthouse, a sprawling space that overlooked the city in a way that made everything seem small in comparison. She hesitated at first, knowing that accepting meant acknowledging how far they had come, how much she had allowed him into her life. But when he looked at her, waiting, patient yet unwavering, she found herself saying yes. The moment she stepped inside, she felt the weight of his world. It was sleek, modern, every detail deliberate, just like the man who owned it. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, while the rich scent of something warm and inviting filled the air. "You cook?" she asked, surprised as she followed him into the kitchen. He glanced over his shoulder, a hint of amusement in his expression. "Occasionally." She leaned against the counter, watching as he moved with practiced ease, pouring 2 glasses of wine before handing one to her. "I didn't take you for the type." He took a sip of his drink, studying her. "And what type is that? The kind who has people to do this for him?" "Perhaps I enjoy doing some things myself." There was something in the way he said it, something intentional. She took a slow sip of wine, letting the silence stretch between them before she finally spoke again. "You don't talk much about your life before all of this." He set his glass down, his expression unreadable. "What do you want to know?" She considered him, knowing that pushing too hard would make him retreat. "Tell me something real." "Something that no one else knows." His gaze held hers, and for a moment she thought he might deflect, but then he exhaled, his fingers grazing the edge of the counter. "When I was younger, I had nothing. Everything I have now, I built from the ground up. But there was a time when I didn't know if I would make it." She didn't speak, letting him continue. "I worked 3 jobs just to afford a place to sleep. There were nights I didn't eat because the money had to go elsewhere. People see the billionaire, the success, but they don't see what came before it. They don't see how hard it was." Her chest tightened, the image of a younger, struggling version of him clashing with the powerful man standing in front of her. She had never considered that his life had not always been one of luxury, but now it made sense the way he carried himself, the control he never relinquished. She set her glass down, stepping closer. "And now," his eyes darkened slightly, "now I make sure I never go back." There was something raw in his voice, something that made her reach for him before she could think better of it. Her fingers brushed against his, and he didn't pull away. Instead, he closed the distance between them, his presence overwhelming in the best way possible. "I don't let people in easily, Natalia," he admitted. She swallowed, her pulse racing. "Neither do I." His fingers traced the edge of her wrist, slow and deliberate. "And yet, here we are." She didn't know who moved first, but suddenly, the space between them disappeared. His hand slid up her arm, his touch sending a shiver down her spine as he tipped her chin up slightly. "This shouldn't be happening," she whispered, though there was no conviction behind her words. "And yet," he murmured, his lips brushing against hers, "it is." The moment his mouth met hers, everything else faded. His kiss was slow at first, deliberate, as if savoring the moment, but then it deepened, his grip tightening as he pulled her against him. It was consuming, the kind of kiss that left no room for doubt, no space for hesitation. By the time they broke apart, her breath was unsteady, her hands still gripping the fabric of his shirt as if letting go wasn't an option. He rested his forehead against hers, his voice low. "Tell me to stop, and I will." She knew that if she said the word, he would honor it. But she didn't want to stop. She wanted to see where this led, even if it terrified her. "I don't want you to," she admitted. A slow, satisfied exhale left him before he kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation. Natalia had always believed in maintaining control of her career, her emotions, and most importantly, her heart. But as she stood in Preston's penthouse, her pulse still unsteady from the way he had kissed her, she realized control had slipped through her fingers the moment she had stepped into his car that night. Preston remained close, his gaze unreadable, his presence overwhelming in a way that made it impossible to think clearly. The city lights cast a glow around them, but Natalia barely noticed. "You're thinking too much," Preston said, his voice quieter now as if he could sense the battle raging inside her. She exhaled, forcing herself to take a step back, though it did little to steady her. "I don't know what this is." He studied her as if weighing his words carefully. "It's whatever we want it to be." "That's not an answer." "No," he admitted. "It's an invitation." The way he said it sent a shiver through her, but she forced herself to stay grounded. Everything about him was intense, consuming, and she wasn't sure she could afford to lose herself in something she didn't fully understand. She glanced down at her hands, forcing herself to focus. I should go. Preston didn't try to stop her. He didn't argue or offer empty reassurances. Instead, he simply nodded, if that's what you want. She expected him to press, to try to convince her otherwise, but he didn't. It was unsettling how easily he let her make the choice, how much power he gave her in a situation where he could have easily taken control. But maybe that was what made him even more dangerous. Natalia turned and walked toward the door, half expecting him to call after her, but he didn't. He only watched, and that was enough to make her stomach tighten in ways she didn't want to acknowledge. She left without another word. 3 days passed, and despite her best efforts, Preston remained in her thoughts. She threw herself into work, taking on extra projects, staying late, convincing herself that distraction was the best solution. But no amount of meetings or deadlines could erase the way he had looked at her, the way his touch had sent a current through her veins that she hadn't felt in a long time. Lee noticed, of course. You're spiraling, her friend commented casually over lunch, eyeing Natalia as she pushed her salad around her plate. I'm not spiraling. You're avoiding, Natalia sighed, setting her fork down. I don't know what you want me to say, Lee leaned forward. I want you to admit that you're scared. That's ridiculous. Is it? Lee tilted her head. Because from where I'm sitting, you met a man who challenges you in ways no one else has, and instead of leaning into it, you're running. Natalia frowned, but she didn't argue. Lee sighed, softer this time. Look, I get it. Preston Jameson isn't exactly an easy man to ignore, but you need to decide, are you afraid of him, or are you afraid of what he makes you feel? That was the real question, wasn't it? And Natalia didn't have an answer. She wasn't planning to see him again. Not because she didn't want to, but because she wasn't sure she was ready for what came next. But fate, as it turned out, had other plans. She had just finished overseeing an event setup when she stepped outside and spotted a familiar car parked at the curb. Preston stood beside it, leaning casually against the door as if he had all the time in the world. Natalia hesitated, her pulse betraying her even before she spoke. What are you doing here? I had a meeting nearby, he said smoothly, and I figured since I was already in the area I'd offer you a ride home. She folded her arms. You expect me to believe that's a coincidence? He didn't bother denying it. Does it matter? She should have said no. She should have walked away and continued pretending that he wasn't slowly unraveling her usual sense of control. But instead, she sighed and shook her head. Fine, but no rooftop restaurants this time. Preston's lips curved not quite a smile, but something close. Noted. He opened the door for her, and despite every warning in her head, she got in. The drive was quieter than she expected, but not uncomfortable. Preston didn't push her to talk, didn't fill the silence with unnecessary words. He simply drove, his focus steady, his presence somehow both commanding and reassuring at the same time. It wasn't until they pulled up outside her building that she finally spoke. I don't know what you expect from me. Preston turned off the engine but didn't move to get out. Instead, he looked at her, his expression unreadable. I don't expect anything, she frowned. Then why are you doing this? Because I want to. His voice was calm, certain. Because I don't believe in letting something slip away before I know what it could be. Her throat tightened. And what if I don't know? Then I'll wait. The simplicity of his answer made her breath catch. Preston Jameson was not a man who waited for anything, and yet here he was telling her that for her he would. She unbuckled her seatbelt and reached for the door handle, but before she stepped out, she looked at him one last time. You might regret that. His gaze didn't waver. I don't think I will. She didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything at all. She got out of the car, walked into her building, and realized, for the first time in a long time, that she wasn't sure who she was more afraid of, Preston or herself. Natalia had spent her entire life making decisions with careful precision, ensuring that nothing, no one could shake the balance she had built for herself. But Preston Jameson had shattered every rule she thought she had about control, about caution, about keeping her heart untangled. And now she was standing outside his penthouse once again, her pulse unsteady as she raised her hand to knock. The door opened before she could, revealing Preston in a crisp white dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal the strong lines of his forearms. His expression shifted the moment he saw her. Surprise flickered in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by something else, something unreadable. "You came back," she swallowed, the weight of her own decision pressing against her ribs. "I don't know why." He studied her for a beat before stepping aside, an invitation without words. She hesitated, then walked past him, stepping into the familiar space that had unsettled her days ago but now felt like something entirely different. Preston shut the door behind them, his presence close without being overbearing. "Tell me what's on your mind." She turned to face him, her fingers curling at her sides. "I don't think I've ever met someone who challenges me the way you do." His gaze didn't waver. "And that scares you, terrifies me." A flicker of something passed through his expression, not victory, not amusement, but understanding. "Why?" "Because I don't lose control," she admitted. "Not with work, not with people, not with myself, but you. You make me forget how to hold onto the walls I've spent years building." Preston exhaled, his hands resting at his sides as if he was resisting the urge to reach for her. "I don't want to tear you down, Natalia. I just want to know you, the real you, not the version you think you have to be." She let out a shaky breath, the weight of his words settling deep inside her. "And what if I don't know how to do that?" He took a step closer, closing the space between them with deliberate slowness. "Then let me help you figure it out." Her heart pounded as she met his gaze, the certainty in his eyes unraveling the last of her hesitation. "I don't want to fight this anymore," she whispered. Preston didn't hesitate. His hands came up, cupping her face with a tenderness that contradicted the intensity of the pull between them. "Then don't." And when he kissed her, it wasn't a battle of wills or a test of control. It was something deeper, something that made her feel like she was standing at the edge of something vast and terrifying and beautiful all at once. She let herself fall. The days that followed felt different, like she had stepped into a world where she no longer had to keep herself guarded at all times. Preston didn't demand more than she was ready to give, nor did he pull away when she hesitated. He met her where she was with patience and quiet certainty, and that terrified her more than anything else. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, she found herself in his penthouse yet again, curled up on the sofa as he poured them both a drink. "You know," he said as he handed her a glass, "I've been thinking." She raised a brow. "That sounds dangerous." His lips twitched. "I want you to come with me," she frowned. "Come with you where?" "Paris," he said simply. Natalia inhaled sharply. "You're going to Paris?" "I have a business event," he explained. "It's only for a few days, but I want you there." She blinked, caught off guard. "Preston." "I know you have work," he continued before she could protest, "but I also know that you can afford to take a few days for yourself." "And I want you to." Natalia hesitated, her mind racing with a dozen reasons why she should say no, but the truth was she wanted to say yes. She wanted to know what it would feel like to let herself be part of his world, not just as an observer, but as someone who belonged there. And maybe, just maybe, she already did. Paris was a whirlwind of luxury and breathtaking moments. Preston had arranged everything down to the smallest detail, ensuring that every second they spent together felt like something out of a dream. The night before they were set to return to New York, he took her to a private rooftop overlooking the Eiffel Tower, the city lights casting a golden glow around them. Natalia turned to him, her heart full in a way she hadn't expected. "This is surreal." Preston studied her, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. "You make everything worth it." Her breath caught. "Preston, I love you." The words settled between them, heavy with meaning, with certainty. Natalia froze, her heart hammering. I love you," he repeated, stepping closer. "I've never said that to anyone before because I never meant it the way I do now." She stared at him, the weight of his confession pressing against every last fear she had. But then she realized she wasn't afraid, she loved him too. She had for a while now. A slow, breathless laugh escaped her lips. "I love you too." Preston's expression shifted, the tension in his shoulders easing as he cupped her face, his thumb brushing against her cheek. "Then marry me," Natalia inhaled sharply. "What?" He reached into his pocket, pulling out a ring, a stunning, elegantly simple piece that somehow felt like it had always belonged to her. "This isn't impulsive," he said. "I knew I wanted to marry you the moment I realized I couldn't imagine a life without you in it." Tears stung the back of her eyes. "Preston, say yes." There was no hesitation. "Yes." The moment the word left her lips, he slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her with a depth that left her breathless. Their wedding was everything she never knew she wanted: intimate, elegant, filled with only the people who mattered. Preston had spared no expense, yet somehow it wasn't the extravagance that made it perfect. It was the way he looked at her as she walked down the aisle, the way his hands trembled just slightly when he held hers. The way his voice was steady and certain when he vowed to love her for the rest of their lives. And as they shared their first dance as husband and wife, Natalia realized something. She had spent so much time fearing the idea of losing control, but with Preston, she had never felt more free. He leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear. "You're stuck with me now," she laughed, resting her forehead against his. "Good." And as they swayed together under the soft glow of the chandeliers, she knew with absolute certainty this was exactly where she was meant to be.